Welcome back to Good Revenue. We're here today with Ashton Belk. She is the president of Huebner, and today we're going to talk about why brands matter. Welcome, Ashton. We are so happy to have you today. Could you tell us a little bit about Huebner?
Sure, glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Huebner Marketing was established 35 years ago by our founder, Jim Huebner, with a focus on being able to elevate and enhance brands, specifically of manufacturers. We work a lot in the B2B space, specifically in M&A.
It's great. Brand is a term that marketers love to throw around. There is a lot of skepticism across the C-suite generally, particularly for the CFO, but I think for others too, around this esoteric, ambiguous term. What do we mean when we say brand?
This is a common conversation that we have. It's really good to really unveil what a brand could all mean, but really why it's so important, because a brand really encompasses so much more than your name or your logo, but it's this comprehensive identity of your business. So, what are the things that your brand stands for? What are the values? What's the personality, the reputation, and then really the emotional connection that your brand has with its audience?
I've also heard you say that brand equity, I'm going to quote you, brand equity is why people do business with you instead of someone else. And I
Yep.
really like that. I think that is a very crisp definition. What are some of the pain points that brand equity can help solve for some of the stakeholders that you work with, which are primarily PE, bankers, acquirers, et cetera?
Sure. So to start with, I think that brand equity is so important too. And when we say brand equity, we really are talking about the value of the brand. So you either have a brand that holds the strings of the customers, like the customers will always go back to that brand, always buy from that brand, always source that brand first. And why they do that is what we really are uncovering within that brand equity space. And even looking at overcoming tarnished brands. So you have to look at how the brand is situated in order to be able to make sure that you're pouring fuel on the right piece of elevating your brand. So you elevate the value of the company. And then in the M&A space, whether or not it's to go to market or to be able to take it to exit. So that for a starting point. Really, when we're talking to private equity, we're specifically looking at being a part of the due diligence process. A lot of times, if they wait too long, there's a cost of delay in not having that brand equity really prioritized and calculated to make sure that it is positioned in the right place in the market, whether or not you're going to market or whether or not you're setting it up for exit. So, really understanding the value pre deal and pre acquisition so that the acquisition to traction is much smoother. So, that's one thing that we're able to work with brands and specifically with private equity to be able to set sail for a smoother course. For investment bankers, really, one of the main things that we are doing with them is being able to drive value by condensing the investment thesis into a smaller, easy to digest opportunity. So instead of reading 50 pages right off the bat, if somebody is interested in a little bit of an entree into whether or not this is a good deal for them, we will take and do interviews, and this is all via video, but do interviews with any of their stakeholders, any of their leadership, and understand the facilities, understand the growth, and really talk about the potential of why this is a good investment and what potential the investment has for the viewer. And so, in a 4 to 5 minute video, you get to know the leadership, you get to know what's possible for the company, and then you're able to understand whether or not it's worth flying to the middle of the Midwest to meet this leadership team because you already know who they are and you already have an understanding that they could be a good fit. And you're also going to open up that book and be able to go through those 50 pages because you already have a quick understanding and a quick capsule of what the company has.
What about for corporate acquirers?
Sure. So, one of the things that we found a lot with corporates in general is really making sure that strategic communications is key for them. And what I mean by that too is we work with a lot of corporates to be able to take a step back if they're going to have change management pieces and really craft the narrative before it goes live. So evaluate anything that's happening in if they're getting ready to sell, they're getting ready to potentially sell, and make sure that they're owning that story. So they're looking at anybody who could be affected by the change or by the announcement and they're making sure that they are situating and crafting a story. And by story, is to be fully transparent. This actually creates transparency. This isn't a way to be able to shape a narrative against something, but it's shaping it to be able to create more of an inclusive opportunity for that company. Then they're able to set themselves up for making sure that their internal audience, and by that I mean their employees, their investors, they all really understand why this company is potentially going to market. And then externally, too, they are letting customers know, they're letting any of the overall audience that they could reach understand why it is important that they are choosing the pathway they are and what's advantageous for that person.
So you're really bringing that all together so that it's clear to someone who wasn't in the deal or maybe wasn't even aware that it was happening, but why we're
Ex-
doing this, why it matters. Is that right?
Yeah, it's really making sure that there isn't an extra layer of
Okay.
something seeming hidden or something that feels like there could be a place for mistrust or changing the narrative around why it's happening. You don't let somebody else take that course for you. You proactively decide and are able to lay it out and you take questions away as opposed to having all the questions thrown at you and questions that are happening behind closed doors. So all of a sudden, everybody's a part of the conversation, and your employees feel better about it. Your customers feel better about it, and you're not leaving room for more question.
I feel like that also helps the entity being acquired. Is that part of the thinking there? Or is it really more on the acquirer side?
I think it helps on both sides for sure. Clarity, I think, is always king. If you can provide more clarity, if you can provide more transparency, and you're able to show the benefit to all potential parties involved, it's always a win.
So I'm excited because we had talked about some specific examples that you have of how brand has really driven value. Going to be super helpful to people listening to this. So I wonder if we could start one of the stories which you called bag of parts.
Sure. We were brought in to work with a company that is PE backed, who had a lot of various acquisitions take place. But the CEO came to us, and his problem, which he stated over and over again, was we're a bag of parts. Our company is a bag of parts. What can we do about this? How can we all talk to each other? Does it matter if we talk to each other? Does it matter if our companies know that the other company exists? And what we went through and did was what we call a relevancy report and a roadmap. But we go through and really understand the best position for them in the market. We went through and weighed based off of various stakeholders. So, private equity, C suite, employees, customers, and consumers. What is it that drives the most value for this entity as a whole? So, we took this bag of parts and recalculated what their brand architecture could be in order to serve every single stakeholder. So, stress testing each of these brand architecture pieces against, will private equity be happy because can they sell this company with ease? Are we driving value for them? And could they be set up to sell it to a financial or a strategic buyer? Great. What do we need to do to make that happen? Does it make sense for internally? How are all of these companies going to talk to each other and why does it matter? It mattered that we actually set them up in a way that they could all talk to each other and now they can cross pollinate. So we're going to teach company A how to be able to talk about company B so that they can then, when they have a problem, we already know the solution because it's another part of your company or a sister company. So we developed an umbrella brand for this company. And then we developed two different divisions and in two specific divisions that were separate, but they also still made sense to each other. And then we had the brands and the different companies underneath of those. By doing this, we were able to drive brand equity up so that all of these companies actually benefited from association because they're part of a stronger, bigger mission as a whole. And so when they talk about themselves from an umbrella brand level as opposed to their individual entities. And this has then given the ability for private equity to come in and either sell off individual divisions or whether or not they could sell it as a whole. But it really allows them to present better. It allows them to drive sales through all of their different companies, and it allows for clarity within the teams to be able to also use each other as resources.
How did you navigate the personalities in that bag of parts?
Honestly, it's just so fun. I love
You're up
this
for
work
the
so much.
challenge.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's just the interesting complexities of it, right? Different people have different personalities that are driving them to make different decisions. And they all hold tight to that company that they have started with, not thinking
Right.
about their brother and sister companies, A, B, C, D, E, F. But they want so much to see success and they want to see this hard work that they've put in win. And that's that common thread. Everybody wants a win and they need to learn how they could get that. So when you show it as advantageous for everybody, then all those different personality types really don't even matter because they all rise to the occasion because they all want to see this united victory.
What about when it comes to managing up, either the holdco or the PE firm that you had to manage in that process, or both?
It's really interesting because I think when we go in to do some of this work, there's understanding and having really good conversations individually with each in-depth interviews and then stress testing it against them. So you're bringing hypothesis to the table and saying, we believe that if we put this structure in place, this would allow you to do X, Y, and Z. Does that make sense to you? What holes are you finding in it? And when private equity puts a hole in it because they're not going to be able to sell to the right buyer or they want to sell a bigger solution or a smaller solution potentially. Then we go back and massage that a little bit and see what we could fix as far as the architecture goes. From a C-suite level too, then they're looking at it from, okay, I need to figure out how all of our companies are going to potentially cross-pollinate and be able to elevate sales. So how are we going to do that? So then we go and we talk to sales teams and we're talking to everybody. But when a third party comes in, for us, it's been beneficial because all of the politics are really pushed aside because we're there to do a job and we are there to be able to benefit every person and every stakeholder. And so by being able to have that, it's just this, it's a really beautiful thing that everybody seems to take a step back because they know it's all for a common good.
And how long does all of this take with a project that sounds pretty complex?
It is. It's really interesting. Typically, once we kick off, as long as we have access to all stakeholders involved and we have a unified participation, it's really about a 6 to 8 week process. And that's bringing this forth and then bringing a roadmap of based off of all this positioning activity and based off of the why of how you're going to restructure, et cetera. Now, here's how you're going to go to market with this. And so that piece of it can be a year's worth of work. You can prioritize what you really believe you want to do, but we prioritize the work that needs to come and happen after that as a phase 2.
I know that you also have done some work with serial acquirers. Can
Sure.
you tell us about some of those experiences?
Sure. It's really fun. I think that every time there's a new acquisition that comes to the table, it's this flag of, okay, let's dig in, let's see what's happening with this brand. But specifically for one client that we work with, they have an umbrella brand that was created to house a lot of family owned businesses that then were all coming together as a larger network to be able to support across the United States and then potentially across the world. So every time they have a new acquisition come in, they need to evaluate what the brand equity is in their specific communities. Does that community see X name as something of value? Do they go and do they do business with them because they know who they are, what family it was, how it was operating, what they expect to get from that brand every time? Or is it they come to it and it's just a box to check? If it's a box to check, that brand could then be rolled up into the greater whole if need be. But if that brand does carry the weight in the community, then doing a paired or an endorsed by type of a solution in a brand architecture world, like X brand that was already existing by so and so, you evaluate the brand, you figure out if it has enough meat or if it has enough community support to be able to make that name stick and then elevate the brand by connecting it to the larger whole. So it's this fun Jenga, if you will. Like you put this piece in and you stack this on top, and then you make sure that the structure stays firm. And whatever is going to create and drive value up and drive the brand equity up so that top name is what is known and it grows, but everybody benefits by being associated.
How did you measure the success of that? Is there a before and after or using brand trackers or some other way of doing that?
Yeah, a lot of it's revenue.
Even better.
It's pretty straightforward. You're looking at the before and after of the connection with the network. So before you were doing X amount of business, you had this much opportunity, but now with the connection to the larger umbrella brand, now they have the ability to be able to also have customers that were involved with another brand also be able to use their company too. So the connection with the network and the connection of the name also allows for more growth, more revenue, and they have more visibility across the United States/world.
How long did it take to actually see that change in revenue? Because I feel like that's the clearest way to get your CFO on board.
Sure. For them, it was pretty quick because once you get into that company, there's a lot of steps that have to take place because you have to make everybody aware that you're joining that company. So again, it's a communications piece. You have to make sure your customers are aware of how it benefits them. It's a massive change. So big change, but don't start with, hey, this is a big change. It's we can serve you better
Right.
now. Look at how we can serve you better. And here's how we're still committed to doing everything you've ever expected, but we've got you. We're going to serve you better because we now have these resources, but have the same expectations you've always had for us. So there's that piece of it. So I would say that piece, I would give that around 3 months to be able to make sure that communications is solidified, goes out. I would do communications strategy planning as soon as possible. And then be able to move into, okay, so now this is here. How are we showing the new brand? Actually physically showing it. Are we showing it differently on our building? Are we all of a sudden changing the way we answer our phones? What does that integration process look like? Which we have plans for that as well, though a lot of times our clients just follow all of the checkpoints they need to have. And then we go into, okay, so now that's there. Now let's go out and sell this. Let's make sure that our customers know that this is available. And then from the holding company level, they get to go out as well and say, now we have this new space available for you as well. Then they have this double teaming effect of the brand is elevated, this company is also elevated. And when done correctly, you don't have holes, you just have an elevated brand that then gets to serve their clients better.
You start to see a multiplier effect, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great. It's really lovely.
Did you ever get a sense of how customers felt about that work? Sounds like there was some positive reaction there.
We go in and we do a lot of customer interviews. Specifically, we do one-on-one customer interviews without any of the company involved so that we really get a raw look at what's happening. We ask about pain points. We ask about, if this were to change, what would you think about that?
Right.
What would need to be overcome? How can we make sure that you still have the same level of service and expectation against it? And those are the big tickers of how we then position the communications
Right.
to go out to serve them well. You can't really craft communications without having them in mind and making sure that you have their voice in your ear while you're writing something. You're answering their questions, you're serving them well, ultimately.
And at the end of the process, do they feel like whatever concerns or issues they had were addressed in that? Or if there were maybe any worries about the brand changing, does any of that kind of come full circle?
Yeah, a lot of times with customer service specifically. So then we'll do checkpoints with them to be able to see what questions are still coming in. The sales team will ask sales a lot of times too. Like you have let's say it's been 3 months, 6 months. What kind of questions are you still getting? And then making sure that we figure out ways to answer them along the way. So we're not just doing this one thing, but we make sure that brand, okay, this person had a conversation with, and maybe there is a muddled narrative there. Let's make sure we go back and clean that up. We
Right.
answer, we clarify all of their questions, and then we push it out to everybody else. Because if one person has that question, most likely everybody
Right.
else does as well. Let's make sure that we change the way that we're talking about it. We have new materials to show them. We are able to make that transition as smooth as possible, but we always have ears to make sure that we're listening to anything that still needs to be answered.
That's super helpful. The last issue we were going to talk about was the cost of delay. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, cost of delay is really interesting. I learned it a lot about cost of delay back in my Agile days. I used to work for an Agile consulting firm, and I'm so grateful for the things I learned and they taught me there. But one of the things is I feel is so relevant here is cost of delay in specifically in an acquisition. Company A acquires company B and they just let it ride. Or some
Right.
people will hear us say, we'll just rip the band-aid off after a year. I've heard that a lot. We're not going to do anything about it for a year. And then eventually we'll just rip the band-aid. It'll be fine.
It's just a
And
boat in the ocean
yeah.
drifting along. It's an
And then
iceberg.
all of a sudden you become company A. All of a
Right.
sudden this one actually fully rolls up, but it's just a piece of the puzzle, but there's no thought put behind it, or there's limited thought. We have seen that happen where then you have to go back and overcome all
Mhm.
of the turmoil that happened in those 6 months. So in those 6 months, customers are confused and customers don't know who this new company is, how they're going to benefit them, or from company B that just got acquired, they're like, oh, from company B that just got acquired, the they have concern about, oh, you're changing your name now. You're a part of a new company. I'm confused. Confusion is that piece that could create lack of productivity inside from your internal teams. It can create confusion or mistrust with your customers. They could be looking for a new solution because they don't know how stable your company
Right.
is. So then we had to go back, rewrite that narrative for them and tell the larger story of why this is beneficial, why it is a good acquisition, how it benefits all companies and future growth. And then from then they were able to clearly everybody can point back to the same message rather than having it be a confused and murky situation. So that was something to me that was one of those red flags. And just make sure you take it into consideration. Make sure you have your story straight. Make sure your internal team knows what's happening so well and can clearly tell the benefits of it so that any of your customers are happy. Your customers are excited about the change. You get to control that. And that's the beautiful piece of it. You have the ability to control that if you just take the time to pay attention to it.
Yeah, I think you're right. This sounds like such an interesting and tricky problem to solve because you're using your prior experience to convince someone of what that actual cost is. Is this an uphill challenge, or this feels like it would be very prevalent, but that people
Yeah.
are like, it'll just sort itself out? How are you working with companies, whether it's the parent co or whoever, to elevate this as a real concern?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's such a vast group of people
Yeah.
we work with a lot of really innovative companies,
Right.
thankfully, that are prioritizing and choosing, that are coming to us saying, we need corporate comms.
So
Got to
they're
get
more
that.
mindful of this. Okay. So it's not like
Yeah,
you have to be like, hey, have y'all thought of this?
but a lot of times too, if we're already involved and working as a partnership or as a marketing arm of a larger company and they are acquiring a company, then we go in and we're like, what is the message behind what you're doing as far as this acquisition goes? Have you measured the brand equity of your new acquisition? Based off of that brand equity, how can we transfer some of that good equity into parent company and elevate it? Or is there something that we need to overcome here and we need to make sure that we're working on what that could look like? So there's a lot of different ways we do that, but if we're already and we work with really trusted partners. So we really value being a strategic partner at the table. We're not coming in as a vendor to make a pretty business card, although we do make pretty business cards. But there's just these people that have allowed us to become a trusted partner, and we want to make sure that we serve them well, and us serving them well means bringing those ideas to the table and making sure that they do think that through and they do follow the steps to ensure that they are elevating all brands, so all of their brands are able to thrive based off of the decisions they make along the way.
In this example, how do you go about coming up with the strategy ultimately?
Most of the times it's through a lot of interviews, it's through a lot of data analysis. So we go through and make sure that we're pulling hard data from like all of the financial records. We're looking at all of the current leadership that's in place. We're interviewing, it's a lot of interviews, it's a lot of customer interviews, it's understanding digital footprints, it's understanding your messaging and understanding what you're currently saying about yourself and what the greater whole is saying about you. Where is there a gap? And then really indexing, we call it a value index, indexing the pieces that are the most important, and then crafting a message around how to be able to properly distribute that.
This is great. Thanks for those examples. Switching gears, since you do work with a lot of PE firms, what do you think that they could do differently? Or maybe another way of putting that is, what do you wish that PE firms would ask you?
Yeah, I would say even beyond ask, I think that just to be a proactive part of the solution, I think that there's to bring the brand to the table earlier, to be a part of the due diligence process. When it's on the back end of it, I think that you could be more successful in the acquisition to traction if there is the amount of work that goes into understanding the brand on the front end. Because a lot of times there's things that you can just elevate. There are simple solutions based off of the brand you're potentially acquiring or adding to your portfolio, or a brand got added to your portfolio, but now how do we move it into hyper growth mode? Okay, there's so many opportunities and solutions, but it comes from knowing that brand so well and understanding and having a baseline of where you're at and where you can go from there. To understand a good brand or a brand with high equity has the ability to drive a higher price point
Or
from a
revenue?
very,
Absolutely.
yeah, from a very basic standpoint.
Right.
If you know how valuable your brand is and you know how valuable your brand is to your consumer, then you're able to drive a higher price point. And then you're able to, with a higher price point, drive more revenue, higher value of the company, higher value at exit. It's a very straight line, but it all comes from understanding how valuable that brand is and what are you going to do with it.
Right. Why do you think that they really need to do the work of explaining why companies in a roll up make sense? Because part of what you're saying is that if this work should be part of diligence, then to me, it seems like part of the question is where this investment thesis is heading. Why does there need to be a narrative or a strategy around why these companies hold together? PE firms are full of smart people. They're in a million Excel spreadsheets. So on the numbers
Yeah.
side, they certainly believe that. But oftentimes there isn't a narrative or a story.
I think that's a really good question because a lot of times it could potentially allow a consumer to then have another purchase price or another product to purchase within your portfolio. Like it's a pretty simple piece where it's you have company A, you already like company A, you're buying from company A. Company B comes in, they have a similar product, but it's a little bit different. And when rolled up, they now have multiple options to choose from. So if you keep that trusted brand and you keep it strong, and then you add another brand to the fold, you're able to have more products, more value, and potentially a further reach within your current customer pool, as well as being able to reach future and adjacent customers as well.
That's great. Switching gears into the buy-in process, there were two things I wanted to cover. One was around acquirers, and one is around CFOs again. On the acquirer side, how do you think that an acquirer that maybe doesn't have a lot of experience, how would they get started and how might they be more comfortable with some of the work that you're talking about?
Yeah. So I think that the big piece to start with, we do a lot of really in depth work, but I think being able to have your own baseline is really helpful. So even doing a light version of being able to understand your baseline equity. Are you considered to be a healthy brand right now? Understanding why your customers do work with you as opposed to somebody else. Some of those larger questions, but breaking them down into a top five. These are the top five reasons that my customers do business with me. Then you understand, are these the customers I want? What customers am I not getting right now that I wish I had? And is there a gap in what we're doing as opposed to how our brand is perceived that could change in order to reach the target customer you want?
Where do acquirers misstep most often when it comes to this? Is it that, again, lack of consideration in due diligence and on the front end, or is it post-acquisition and integration?
Sometimes it's an integration. I think that I think I could make a case for pre, during, and post, but a lot of times post acquisition too. You're excited, you're moving quickly, there's a ton of new problems that have come up or new opportunities that have come up. And you need to make sure that even from a comms perspective, that you're going back to the basics of how are we communicating this? How are we going to continue to drive trust and value in this process? So making sure that is as soon as that transaction is complete, that everybody, not only 1 month out, but 3 months, 6 months out, is up to date with why it mattered, what impact it has made, why it's benefiting them to each individual stakeholder group, I think is imperative.
A
So,
CFO and brand, there's just this oil and water in a
yeah.
lot of organizations. And at the same time, I feel like the best CFOs I've worked with really do want to be a partner on the investment and growth side. They don't just want to cut costs and look at spreadsheets. How do you get CFOs comfortable with this brand work? How do you partner to really understand what the return on investment is?
I think you just said it. We really partner with them. So they're not off in their own office crunching numbers. They're a part of the solution. So they're bringing charts to the table. They're showing us where dips and seasons are taking place. We're evaluating what alongside them as a linked arm partner, what trends are there financially for the company that we can go in and maybe identify what's happening from a brand level that could end up helping smooth out some of the volatility that they're seeing. There's a lot of different ways that we come alongside, but we never silo ourselves in the process. We look at this as an organizational whole and making sure that the whole, from finance to the employees on the manufacturing floor, are all having their voices heard. They're all a part of the work, and they all know that the bigger business objectives are what's all in mind. If we're looking to increase sales by $5-10 million in X amount of years, how are we going to do that? It takes all of those people being aligned to be able to do that. And how do we do that? From a brand perspective, we make sure that the brand speaks to the needs of the customers and make sure that we are also changing the target or the position of the company in order to be able to meet demands in the market. So it all flows together. CFOs should be next to us at the table as well.
How should the CFO measure this work then? Is it revenue? I think they would prefer that, certainly.
A lot of times, yes. I think that it's also tracking it across the board. If there is an objective that has been set by the C-suite as a whole, brand is there to help them meet that. The brand isn't
Absolutely.
there to throw shiny things at it. The brand is there to support that goal. And without the brand and the integrity of the brand and a rise in equity in the brand, you're not going to be able to do that. So if you're starting to move that line towards reaching those bigger business objectives and the brand is supporting that, that's how you see the growth. You're seeing actual growth within the company based off of the work and the effort and the intention you're putting into your brand and how it's perceived in the market.
Ashton, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you for sharing so many insights with us. Our last question, which we always ask, what
Yeah.
do you think that high performance companies do differently from average performers?
Thankfully, again, we work with some really amazing companies, and I'm so grateful to lock arms with them. So, learn a lot from them as we go. But a lot of times it's alignment. They're bringing all of the people that they're bringing a lot of different voices to the table together. So, they're not operating out of silos. They're listening. They're very good at listeners to the different pain points in the companies, and they look for solutions. And from a brand perspective or from a communications perspective, they're keeping everybody up to date. They're making sure that they are transparent and they're highly communicative of the the processes, the changes, their goals. They communicate their goals well to the organization as a whole. So that whole organization is aligned and is running after the same vision together, as opposed to feeling like they are on the outside of somebody who's sitting in the C-suite's goal. So it's been really neat, but I think that those are some of the key things: alignment, vision, and very clear communications and grasping that and running with it.
A great place to leave this discussion. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Good Revenue. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show, give us a rating, or leave us a review. It helps other listeners find us, and we really appreciate your support. You can also catch full videos and highlights on our YouTube channel.